They told you it was strength to care, to show up soft, loyal, empathetic, present, but they didn't tell you what it costs to stay that way once the game changes, once the mask drops, once loyalty becomes leverage. It always starts the same. You're not guarding anything. You think sincerity buys peace. You think effort earns you favor. You think being real gives you power. It doesn't. What it gives them is a map of your patterns, your tells, your softness, your attachments, your deepest need for peace, for validation, for being seen as the good one. And with that map, they wait. They don't need to outsmart you. They just need to let you keep caring about the wrong people, caring about the wrong outcomes, caring about fixing what they keep breaking. That's the slow poison. It's not betrayal that breaks a man. It's the silence afterward, when the part of him that still wants to care keeps whispering that maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe if he just proves he's strong enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they'll come around. They never do, because once they see you're still holding out for them, they know they still own you. And that's what Machiavelli understood, that the most dangerous man is not the one who loves openly, but the one who has learned to withdraw that love strategically. Not to punish, to neutralize. They say a man becomes powerful when he stops caring what people think. That's wrong. A man becomes powerful when he learns to care selectively, when his love is not predictable, not owed, not constant. When his care becomes dangerous, not because it hurts, but because it disappears. So, if you've been betrayed, abandoned, overlooked, if they used your care as currency, then stop proving your worth. Start becoming expensive. Because caring too much doesn't just cost you peace. It costs you power. And the moment you see that clearly, you'll never waste either again. If this already hits something in you, then stay. Subscribe. Comment. You're not alone. But the man you need to become, he's not waiting. That you're too sensitive. That you overthink. That you need to lighten up. But deep down, you know what they're really saying. You feel too much for us to control you easily. Because caring isn't weakness. Caring is currency. And once they know you're willing to spend it without limit, they start printing debts with your name on them. It starts subtle. They flinch when you set a boundary. They joke about how intense you are. They downplay their disrespect, then act surprised when you react. Not because they misunderstood you, but because they needed to train you. They had to make you doubt yourself just enough to stay, just enough to keep caring, even when it made you bleed. That's how they keep you useful. And the more you care, the more they rewrite the rules. You show loyalty, they call it clingy. You speak directly, they call it aggressive. You take space, they call it abandonment. You get quiet, they call it cold. Every move you make becomes a weapon they twist back on you. Because as long as you still care what they think, you'll keep showing up. You'll keep explaining, defending, proving, bleeding. That's the trap. Not the pain, but the need to justify it. And the only way out? You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop flinching. You go still, because power doesn't announce itself. It disappears, quietly. It doesn't raise its voice. It lowers its energy. It doesn't ask to be understood. It observes who's trying to misunderstand it. And it always remembers. The moment they needed to distort your care was the moment they knew it could dismantle them. So no, you're not too sensitive. You're just finally noticing what they hoped you'd never see. That your care was never the problem. Your care was the threat. They never actually wanted your strength. They wanted your silence. Because real strength, the kind that doesn't need applause, that doesn't flinch when left alone, makes people uncomfortable. It reveals them. It strips away the illusions they hide behind. The stories they tell themselves about being a good person, doing their best, not meaning to hurt you. They did, and they knew exactly what they were doing when they smiled while doing it. They knew you wouldn't walk away the first time. They knew you'd hesitate, question yourself, make excuses for their behavior, because you cared. And that care was predictable. Predictability is control. That's what makes a man easy to use, easy to discard, easy to return to when they need something again. A man who still needs to be seen as loyal, loving, understanding. A man whose identity is built on being different from the rest. But here's the truth. If you have to prove you're different, you're not. If they can't feel it in your presence, your limits, your discipline, your distance, they will never respect it. They don't respect effort. They respect absence. Not silence born of fear, but silence born of clarity. Because once a man becomes clear, not emotional, not performative, not reactive, just clear, the entire room changes. They talk differently. They watch their tone. They second-guess their moves. Because deep down, they know. A man who no longer fears being misunderstood is a man they can't manipulate anymore. This is what Machiavelli warned about. Not cruelty, not arrogance, not domination, but strategy, emotional restraint, tactical presence, a love that can vanish without warning and never return. That's real power, and most people will never know how to respond to it because it doesn't need them to. The first time you walk away and don't explain yourself, you feel it. The silence is heavier than the fight would have been, because you're not trying to win anymore. You're not trying to be right. You're not trying to save something that already killed itself. You're just gone, and they feel it. They text. They circle back. They test the waters. Not because they've changed, but because they need to know if you haven't. They need to know if they still live inside your mind. If your silence is a tactic, or if it's become your nature. That's the shift. Not acting like you don't care. Becoming someone who doesn't need to. Not in spite of your depth, but because of it. You start realizing how cheap your energy had become. How quickly you gave presence to people who hadn't earned it. How many times you responded out of principle, not power. They weren't respecting your value. They were studying your triggers. They didn't care about making it right. They just didn't want to be forgotten. Because when you're forgettable, they don't reach back. But when you're unforgettable, they can't let you go. Even if they have no intention of doing better. That's the psychology they'll never admit. They don't miss you. They miss the version of themselves that existed when you cared. That reflection, that access, that emotional gravity. Now it's gone. And you didn't warn them. You didn't announce your worth. You didn't make a scene. You just stopped answering. Not to punish, to preserve. And that's what they can't stand. Because your detachment, your silence, your refusal to re-enter the story, it forces them to sit in the echo of their own behavior. And for once, they can't use your care to clean it up. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes no one is coming to rescue him, not from betrayal, not from disrespect, not from the consequences of misplaced loyalty. And in that moment, something cracks. Not with noise, not with rage, with stillness. The kind of stillness that only comes from seeing things exactly as they are without distortion. No more excuses, no more hopes, no more waiting for someone to finally recognize his worth. They won't. Not because he isn't valuable, but because they were never looking for value. They were looking for access. And he gave it. Freely, repeatedly, desperately. To be understood, to be seen, to finally feel safe. But safety bought through approval always turns into a leash. And when they sense your hunger for it, they stop offering love and start offering permission. Permission to feel good about yourself. Permission to stop apologizing. Permission to exist without guilt. And the second you need their permission, you've lost yourself. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." He wasn't talking about cruelty. He was talking about leverage. If your love is not respected, it must be feared. Not because you're dangerous, but because your absence is. And once they realize you can walk away not to prove a point, but because they've become irrelevant to your future, their entire strategy collapses. Now they're left with nothing to negotiate. No emotional ransom to demand. No buttons left to press. You've shut off the machine, and they know they built it with your care as the power source. So when that care gets cut, they feel it. Deep. They'll start calling you cold, detached, distant, unreachable. It's projection, not truth. Because what they're really saying is, you're no longer controllable. You're no longer flattered by crumbs. You're no longer destabilized by silence. You're no longer waiting for them to do what they should have done the first time. And that terrifies them. Because when a man stops needing closure, he becomes untouchable. When a man stops needing to be understood, he becomes unreadable. When a man stops needing to be loved, he becomes dangerous. Not violent, disciplined. There's a difference. One acts out, the other moves on. One screams, the other leaves the room. One fights to be seen. The other lets you wonder why you lost him. They call you cold, because you no longer respond. They call you arrogant, because you no longer explain. They call you bitter, because you no longer soften to make them feel better about what they did. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. You saw what they did, and you stopped allowing your care to justify it. You saw what they wanted, and you stopped handing it to them. You saw what they needed, and you made them earn it. That's the shift. You're not angry. You're not hurt. You're not seeking revenge. You're just done. And for people who only knew how to extract value from you, emotionally being done is the most brutal thing you could ever be. Because it means they don't have access anymore. Not to your thoughts, not to your attention, not to your presence, and worst of all, not to your care. Because once that dies, there's nothing left for them to hold on to, and no way back in. You'll notice something strange once you stop caring. The world goes quiet. Not because it's peaceful, but because the noise you used to mistake for connection disappears. The constant emotional tension, the double meanings, the just checking in texts, the veiled guilt, the passive slaps disguised as concern. Gone. And what's left is not comfort, it's space. Space most people can't handle, because they don't know who they are without the chaos, without the fight, without someone reacting to them. You used to be that someone. They'd bait you, you'd bite. They'd disappear, you'd chase. They'd lie, you'd stay. Why? Because you cared. Because you thought love was earned through suffering. Because you thought the more you proved your loyalty, the more they'd value it. But now, you don't argue. You don't explain. You don't show them how much it hurt. You just vanish, quietly, completely, without ceremony. Because a man who knows what he's worth doesn't announce it. He just stops showing up where it isn't honored. And when that happens, they panic. They don't say it. They might not even admit it to themselves. But the silence rattles them. Your stillness disturbs them. Because now they're left with the mirror and no one to blame. That's what they feared all along. Not your pain, your peace. Because once you find peace, their chaos becomes obvious. Once you pull back your care, their manipulation becomes useless. Once you stop playing the role, the entire script collapses. And suddenly, they're no longer the protagonist. They're just noise in a play that no longer needs them. You never needed revenge. That was never the point. Revenge means you still care, that it still burns, that you still need them to feel something, anything, so they know what they did. But what they did isn't the tragedy. What you allowed is, you tolerated things you said you'd never tolerate. You explained yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You kept offering love like it could fix people committed to staying broken. That's what haunts you, not the loss, the self-betrayal. But here's the truth, no one says out loud. Self-betrayal always precedes external betrayal. You gave them the blueprint. You showed them the cracks. You handed them the weapon and told them how to use it, thinking love would stop them. It didn't, because love doesn't change people. Leverage does. And once you lose leverage, they lose restraint. That's what no one warns you about. They say love conquers all. that good people get good outcomes, that if you stay true and open-hearted, things will work out. But they don't. Not when you're dealing with people who see care as a weakness. Not when you're surrounded by opportunists who smile while they bleed you out. Not when your goodness is used as a mirror for their sickness. You don't fight that with more empathy. You fight it by removing access. You fight it by becoming unfazed. You fight it by letting go not to heal but to reclaim precision. You stop casting pearls. You stop needing closure. You stop showing up as the version of you they once fed on. And when they circle back, because they always do, they'll find something they weren't prepared for. A man who no longer needs to care. Not because he's numb, because he's finally free. That version of you, the one who needed to be understood, needed to be seen, needed to be chosen, died the day you realized they never would. And it wasn't a dramatic death. It didn't scream. It didn't beg. It didn't leave a note. It just stopped. Stopped reaching out. Stopped hoping. Stopped believing there was something noble about staying loyal to people who kept proving they weren't. Because once you see clearly, there's no unseeing it. You remember the looks, the shrugs, the half-hearted apologies, the way they minimized what broke you. You remember being met with sarcasm when you brought your honesty. You remember the way they twisted your self-respect into overreacting. You remember trying to stay calm while they tested how far they could push you. They were never confused. They were calculating. They studied how much you could take, and then they gave you just enough to keep you confused. That's not love. That's control. And the only thing that breaks it is indifference. Not fake indifference. Not cold posts. Not silence laced with hope. Not pretending you're over it while checking your phone. Real indifference. The kind that doesn't check back. The kind that doesn't care who's watching. The kind that's not waiting to be proven right because it already knows it was. You don't need closure from them. You need closure from who you were with them. The version of you that was willing to shrink, chase, explain, tolerate, and forgive, just to feel chosen. That version, he served his purpose. He's not the problem, but he's not coming with you, because the man you're becoming doesn't negotiate his worth. He doesn't audition for roles in other people's lives. He doesn't throw his care at chaos, hoping it will become character. He watches, he listens, he chooses, and when he walks, there is no sequel. You won't recognize yourself at first, not because you've changed, but because you've returned. Returned to the version of you that didn't need permission, that didn't dilute his instincts to maintain the peace, that didn't hold space for people who only came close to extract something. This isn't healing. This is correction, a recalibration of what you allow, a reset of what you entertain, a refusal to confuse being good with being available, because what you allowed was never about them. It was about the parts of you that hadn't yet learned to leave, the parts that needed to believe love had to hurt to mean something, the parts that thought silence was maturity, the parts that thought patience would eventually be rewarded. But now you see it. Patience without standards is self-destruction. Understanding without limits is exploitation. Love without leverage is slavery. And when you take that in fully, the game changes. You don't cut people off. You let them drift. You don't close the door. You just don't answer when they knock, because power isn't loud. It's not performance. It's not the flex of ego. Power is being able to leave and not looking back. Power is sitting in silence while they squirm in the chaos they created. Power is walking into a room and making them feel your absence before you've even spoken. That's what real detachment gives you. Not bitterness, not isolation. Freedom, because when your care is no longer predictable, you stop being predictable. When your love is no longer easy to reach, you stop being easy to use. And when your peace is no longer disturbed, they realize they've lost all control. You don't have to say it. They'll feel it. This is what they fear most. Not your anger, not your confrontation, not even your success. They fear your emotional neutrality, the part of you that no longer plays the game, the man who listens and doesn't react, who hears the same lies and doesn't even flinch, who recognizes the pattern and feels nothing but calculation. Because once you become emotionally neutral, the dynamic dies. They can't provoke what you've silenced. They can't seduce what you've seen through. They can't confuse what you've already categorized. And that scares them because control only works on people still searching for meaning. You're not. You're not looking to fix anyone. You're not looking to be chosen. You're not looking to be the exception. You're looking at patterns, behaviors, inconsistencias, and you're moving accordingly. That's the kind of presence they can't manipulate. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't overstay. It doesn't try to be understood. It simply removes itself. And that's what Machiavelli knew, that when love is expected, it becomes assumed. When care is automatic, it becomes devalued. And when your presence is consistent, it becomes exploited. But when your attention becomes rare, when your validation becomes silent, when your presence becomes earned, you stop being a giver. You become gravity. They orbit. They reach. They try to mirror what you once gave freely. But now there's no path back, because the bridge didn't burn. You dismantled it, brick by brick, memory by memory, emotion by emotion, until there was nothing left but truth. And the truth was simple. They never deserved what they so easily discarded. And you never needed to beg for what you were always willing to give. The final shift comes in silence. Not the kind where you're waiting to be missed. Not the kind where you're hoping they'll come back better. The kind where you finally realize it doesn't matter if they do. You're not looking back, because you no longer need them to be wrong for you to be right. You no longer need them to regret it for your value to be proven. You no longer need to revisit the wreckage to justify walking away from the fire. You saw what they did with your care. You saw how they handled your presence. You saw how easily they treated something sacred like it was disposable. And now they have to live with what they lost. Not the old you. Not the soft version. Not the predictable responder. Not the one they could always bait into explaining, proving, chasing. That version is dead, buried without a eulogy. And in its place is the man you were always meant to become, unshaken by rejection, unaffected by absence, unbothered by noise. You walk different now, not to prove anything, but because you finally see how little you owe the world. Your care is no longer a currency for approval. It's a weapon of choice, deployed rarely, strategically, without warning. And when you care now, they'll know, because it will cost them something. Not your peace, not your self-respect, not your power, but theirs. That's the final lesson. The most dangerous thing a man can do is care without discernment, because care without power makes you a target, but care with precision, it makes you unforgettable. They'll never admit it, but they'll feel it every time you don't answer. Every time your name comes up in a room and your energy isn't there. Every time they realize they can't recreate the version of themselves that only existed in your presence. You never lost them. They lost access to you.